work. See,
we,
the thing about
we're just so you know, we're live right now.
yeah, good as gold. No, I'm just sharing the breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah.
I'm just figuring out that if I were to, I was trying to think of a way of looking, because I believe you can see me looking straight at the camera right now, because
Beautiful,
that's
man.
from the left-hand side of the iPad.
Yeah.
But if I want to look you in the eyes, I have to look away from that.
I know.
I'm just trying to think.
So I'm a bit the same. So my laptop is down there, right? So that's me looking at my laptop, looking at you, and I have a camera here, and that's so you at the moment you're down there. So I know.
Yeah.
I know
And
the smart thing to do would be set up your camera, whether you've got a webcam or a a mirrorless cam or whatever, literally in front of your screen where your zoom is.
That's what was passing through my mind, and I now realise that the thing I just tweeted is the very thing I should be bringing up on the screen behind this, which I'm doing right now.
All right.
Let's see what happens.
David Slack, good morning.
Morning. Nice to see you, Pat.
Yeah, well, nice to see part of you. Top half of your head's missing, but that's all good. Yeah, it's
killing the background volume there for you.
I know, I've done that as well. It's funny. This has happened to me in my studio a few times. You sort of forget how many things you're connected to. So my phone is connected to my watch, my Mickey Mouse watch, see? And it's connected to my MacBook, and there's an iPad somewhere. And sometimes when you're in a space and everything's on, when the phone rings, the watch goes off, the iPad goes off, the MacBook goes off, all at the same time. So I was chatting to Frank Richer yesterday in a podcast, and I said to him, I'm starting to get comfortable sitting in my freaking bedroom, but that's a bit of a concern because I know I'm going to forget something. So something will happen today, I'm sure, that's not supposed to, and
we can cope.
Oh well, we will manage. It's we're not TVNZ. This is not Simon Dallow speaking. We're just a hackery bunch of freebie guys in the background.
Well, it's one of the nice dimensions of what's happened with this stay-at-home life, that it's become acceptable to show the informal and rigged-up nature of things, which we all live in all the damn time.
Yeah.
And the confection of your conventional media is not something that you particularly miss, I reckon.
I think we started to get the ability to use lesser quality technology, can I say, not necessarily content or product, but the way it looks and sounds, when you started to see places like CNN speak to people on Skype. And that's been in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I've been saying it for quite a while. You've been like, well, CNN will talk to someone on Skype, so, and they'll get that echoey background noise. I mean, like a lot of people have mics and stuff at home these days, but a lot of people don't as well. And if it's good enough for CNN, or put your preference of television station in the spot, if it's good enough for TVNZ or ABC or whoever, then yeah, it's good enough for us. And I think that, I've said this a few times to people, and actually you're a very good person to talk to about it, because you have had your fingers in lots of media pies, so to speak. But I have always said that New Zealand has been a bit behind the rest of the world with how we deal with the ability to do more sort of informal media. If you look around the world, and America is probably the yardstick, the podcast, the blog, the independent media are the ones who are kind of taking down, if you can say mainstream media, whatever the correct word is, taking their advertising revenue away, and it's where the people of America are turning to, especially the podcasting world. And, how many times I've mentioned the name Joe Rogan on this podcast, I don't know, but he's sort of the yardstick.
Sure.
Yet in New Zealand, that hasn't necessarily happened as much, and we as a people have kind of stayed with traditional media predominantly for our sources of news and entertainment. But I wonder if at the end of this, I mean, as you know, I worked for News Talk ZB for a long time, and right in the studio next door to me was the Radio Sport guys. I'm devastated that Radio Sport's disappeared. Yes. It's actually probably, other than my kids who listen to the hits in the morning, probably the only radio I ever actually listened to was Radio Sport, because the one place you could get sports information on a regular. And I'm devastated for the team and for the people and for the guys. But I wonder after this if the people who are writing the blogs, running the independent websites, not to point at what we're doing, but generally hosting the podcasts, are going to be 20% more relevant in society. I've just picked a random number because, they haven't had to find $1 million budget to run one show. Oh gosh, $1 million, man, and the rest for some of those. They haven't had a $20 million expense to have to find to run a whole station. They've had to find $500 a month to pay their studio space, even though they can't use it. You know what I mean?
I surely do. And you've given me the thought that there is a second analogy I might use from now on to talk about what's besetting media and where we go next. Because in recent weeks, the one I've been using, or the point of historical reference, has been what happened in '84 to farming.
Right.
84 through the following years, and how that was a colossal upheaval and huge trauma, and the worst kind of upheaval and people taking their lives. And yet, you wouldn't find a farmer today who would say that it was the wrong thing to do.
Right.
That it was utterly necessary, and that the whole structural arrangement for farming was just completely wrong. It had been subsidised, and all of the wrong signals had sent it off in a fully the wrong direction. And I've been using that to talk about the state of media, that you've got these large lumbering organisations with huge overheads, and they're not the right size, they're not the logical size in an era where, as you've just laid out, all you really need to do to be a valuable media organisation is a server and a few writers and camera people, and somebody who's good with a camera and somebody who's good with a mic, like yourself. And so I've been talking about that, but you've reminded me of another dimension now when you talk about the rough and ready. And that is something that I've often said when I've been talking to people about speech making and speech writing,
right?
Which is essentially the living I've made for a long, long time. And that is, it doesn't actually matter how shitty you are at it. It doesn't matter how awkward and halting and unfamiliar you are with the whole process. If you get up there, especially, let's say, at a funeral, and the story you have to tell is a gripping one.
Yep.
If it's from the heart, if it's you're talking about this person you knew and these things that happened, and even if you're struggling to put the words together, and even if you're wanting the ground to open up underneath you because you're so painfully shy, none of that worries people if what you're actually telling is fascinating or gripping or compelling or authentic or some kind of recognizable truth, because this is what comedians do, this is what good dramatists do. You share what we all kind of know about but don't actually say out loud, and when that gets said, everybody leans in, and it doesn't matter how crappy you are at doing it. It's really great stuff. If what you're saying is gripping, that compensates for a whole lot of faults and sins. And so, like you just said, kind of crappy setting is the least of it.
Welcome to my crappy setting. I think that
it looks like a V cam.
Yeah, I have to keep reminding. I put up the lights because I've got the paint in my room is like that horrible 90s yellow. So at least that distracts away from, and like over that side, the reason I'm sitting here is to hide that cupboard because it's got no framing around. It really is the wrong place to be doing this, but more people probably listen to this than watch it, so that's fine. They don't know what we're talking about. Don't go and look at the pictures, just listen to it. I've been, it echoes the thoughts that I've been saying, and it's not actually about this, but a point that I've had for several years. I say to people, once TV started to get bigger and flasher and stuff, and it was, it was 720p, it was 1080p, it was 4K. Now we're talking 8K. I'd rather watch, I watched just out of just by chance, I caught the end of Training Day the other day with Denzel Washington. Amazing movie. I'd rather watch, Denzel Washington doing Training Day with basically no special effects and an SD version, and it looks even in black and white perhaps, versus the most amazing 8K, green screen, Guardians of the Universe does Hulk versus
Yeah.
the whatever. I'm not actually saying those movies are bad, but if it was the most terrible storyline in the world, but it looked amazing, I'd rather watch a good storyline that was, quality of the actual footage was bad. So, and let me just say,
Every time.
I do actually like those Guardians of the Galaxy things. I'm not saying that style of movie is crap, but what I'm saying is a good story and poor quality of whatever the viewing is, if it's SD or whatever, versus the 8K pile of crap. I know what I'd rather pick.
You bet.
Yeah.
True thing. How was life in Dunedin, by the way? Oh, we haven't spoken since you moved down there.
Today, it's an absolute crap fest as I look out my bedroom window. No, I love it. It's great. It's great. I mean, I've said a few things that some of people who know me, who live here, have been like, "Why do you say that about Dunedin?" I do say them with the most kind of loving feeling. Like, for example, how you can't charge your phone in your car because you're never driving for long enough. So when I lived in Huia and worked in Cook Street in central Auckland, even in a good traffic day, it's a 35-minute run home, maybe even 40. On a bad traffic day, it was an hour to hour and a half. Your phone would be at 50, 60% pretty easily. Here, it's not even worth doing. You let your phone die and you plug it in when you get to your home or your office or whatever. So, there's some cute, quirky little idiosyncrasies. But, no, I love it. And there's so many things about Dunedin in particular. I lived in Tauranga for probably 20 months. Didn't like it. I felt really like that small town mentality and small town vibe, whereas it's the same size as Dunedin. But I'll say this as an opinion, but purely because of the university and the money that brings into the economy and the people that brings into the economy.
Yes,
it's night and day. Even though it's the same size, this does feel like a metro city, but with the benefits of well, it's not a small town because it's 140,000 people or something, but of a much smaller city. So I think Dunedin is overrepresented in its assets. We have more assets than perhaps a city of this size should have, and I do believe it's primarily, and maybe even solely, because of the university. You bring in 20-odd thousand students, maybe 15,000 of them are from outside the region. I don't know the exact numbers. Maybe more than that because you've got Otago Polytechnic as well, obviously. And they have an expectation to be provided for various pubs and clubs, and so we have this very cool little economy and lovely resources and assets that I would say are primarily there to provide for the students, but the rest of us who live here get the benefit of them. So yeah. If I could have one more thing, and it's particularly irrelevant right now, is that the airport here does go to Australia, but that's it. I'd like to see it go to a few more international places in theory, but who's going anywhere at the moment anyway? But that's about it. In fact, it's the opposite, isn't it? Everyone's coming here.
You're right, though. Inquiring mind, it gives you a greater number of inquiring minds and creative minds, and that's not just the students. That's the staff the academic staff there who are there to shepherd them, and that makes a huge difference to the feeling of a place. I always say that about Wellington, that I prefer to live out here, but it's a great indoor life in Wellington because you've got inquiring minds, creative minds. It's bloody good.
Well, I think that if you like Wellington, you like Dunedin. Because actually, when leaving Auckland, we basically opened up, what shall we do? That was sort of the question. We sold this big house out in out on the Manukau Harbour and thought, what shall we do? Shall we stay in Auckland and reinvest? And for me, it was pretty big because a lot of my work, evolved around media and stuff, and Auckland's sort of the hub of that. And we eventually, I was married at the time, no longer, but loved Wellington, thought great place to be, but came to Dunedin and there was something a bit different. But I've heard people describe Wellington sort of as a little Melbourne, and Dunedin is sort of a smaller Wellington. So there's that connection of that kind of arts, central city, cafe community, creative as well. Like we had the Gigatown, literally as we were driving to Dunedin.
Oh yeah,
we won
I remember that.
Dunedin got given the Gigatown thing, so it was the first place to get 1 gig internet into houses,
Yeah.
And that actually has driven quite a lot of millennial entrepreneurial type people into a sector of the city that they actively say, like that they've said this out loud to me, we're trying to turn this into New Zealand Silicon Valley. So there's another whole
Yeah.
culture here as well, and that's primarily based around the fact that the gig fibre lines came readily accessible to here first. So
Yeah.
there's this academic area. There's this. It's kind of weird though, because there's this academic life here, students and lecturers and professors and stuff who typically are maybe a bit more liberal, a bit more left leaning. And the two MPs that are here are left leaning. Well, they're left. They're Labour, who are incumbents. Yet there's still a bit of a conservative vibe to the community as well. I've never really
Yeah.
understood that entirely, because they talk about it being Scottish and a bit older, but actually everything you see at the surface level, we've got a mayor at the moment who is a Green Party member, 2 Labour MPs, and a massive university, which, as you know, is a bastion of all terrible liberal ideas, as I'm being told by various Fox News contributors constantly.
You've given me I've realised that mayor of yours is the only mayor in the world who interviewed me about my Bullrush book.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
He
Yeah,
did.
at R1, yes, and he was on student radio. So it's a really interesting. I feel like I'm doing an advert. So in summation, if you'd like to move to Dunedin, no, I feel like it's lovely.
It's more than that though. It's more than that though, because that's exactly what we're talking about right now. In this lockdown time,
Yep.
and conversations everywhere. What happens when we come out? What can be done? What possibilities are there, especially in terms of filling the gaping holes in the economy?
Yeah.
And there are real questions about what ways we can be doing imaginative and productive and worthwhile things in technology, and that whole Gigatown thing is potentially instructive in figuring out what can and can't be done with startups and with more infrastructure for that. So I don't know how much has happened there, to be honest, but I'd be fascinated to hear some stories about it, and I think we need to hear as many as we can.
Yeah, I'm assuming now, because that was 5 years ago, I'm assuming now every part of the country can get that same sort of thing to their home. But I don't know if you can or if you can't. When I say every part, I guess I'm talking major metros. I'm sure, the middle of rural Waikato might have difficulty having a gig line to their house. But, I'm sitting in my bedroom at the moment, even though I've got a laptop, I've hardwired it to the router, and I'm getting over 950 meg per second. And
yeah, I'm looking at mine. What are we showing? 1.9 to 1.4, yeah, flat out.
1.4 what?
They I was trying to avoid saying that because I keep forgetting which is which, but that's a shitload.
Right. Okay. So you're over a gig. 1.4. You do 1. That's really quick. You must be. Are you central Auckland?
No, Devonport.
Oh, okay.
I can see the sky tower from here, though.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was talking to a flat earther the other day. I think I can from here as well because there's no curvature. So obviously it's dominated part of the. I've done probably 10 of these podcasts from my bedroom. I think you're number 83 in the series. I'm expecting to get to at least 100 in the bedroom. So we'll see how that goes. Although I have decided to potentially build a studio downstairs as well. And the question now is going to be, and I hate to have to ask this question, is do I actually then just move into that studio, or do I sort of try to run a skeleton studio from home and keep my beautiful studio in the Central City area, which I am absolutely in love with and have only just finished building.
Yeah.
It's a heartbreaking decision.
There's a lot to be said for the mind space you get from being in the right work space.
Yeah, but if I can't use it, I'm like, what am I going to do? Because it would appear that under level 3, and who knows, but I'm assuming we're probably going to go to it next week or this week, in 4 or 5 days. that nothing's really going to change for me, because basically
Yeah, right.
it appears it says if you can work from home, work from home.
Mm.
And after doing maybe 10 of these sort of podcasts from home, I can't now rightly go, oh, no, I've got no way to work from home. So I better get into my studio. So, yeah. So we'll see. But I mean, look, I have no complaints at all, because, I know people, and I don't know if you're one of them. Maybe I saw it on your Facebook post, maybe I didn't, that have finished, for example, writing articles for various newspapers because
Oh, yes, that's me.
yeah.
Chucked out at 30,000 feet from stuff.
And is that because of this climate?
Yeah, it is. It happened by degrees. The first thing they said was, I did 2 columns. One was for the Your Weekend magazine,
yeah,
and the other was for the Sunday Star Times. The first round was, sorry, these magazines, we're not allowed to spend any money on freelancers anymore, so that one was gone. Then about a week later, they said, we're going to lose most of the columnists, but we're keeping hold of you. This is Sunday Star Times, because they like you. And then they rang the next day and said, no, we're not. So
we don't like you anymore.
Yeah. And so it sort of sticks in the craw a bit when the stuff keeps saying they haven't laid anybody off. Well, no, they haven't laid off any full-time employees, but
right.
they chucked out all of the freelancers, because I was also doing freelance, writing for them and outside of columns, and that's all gone too. So, it does kind of feel like, for the rats and mice money that the freelancers represent, the sacrifice is a bit lopsided. They're only now talking about their expensive executives taking some kind of a modest comparative haircut.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I just wonder about the relative merits of those.
Yeah,
considerations.
That's interesting. So that's an interesting point you make. So what I hear you saying is, even though media outlets are doing it tough, that actually maybe they're still putting on a bit of bravado. We've laid no one off, but I don't know, what is there, 50 freelancers that no longer, I've picked a random number, a number of freelancers. So actually they have made a lot of cuts that have gone under the radar. I haven't really thought of that before. And yeah. I saw a comment, and a person who will remain nameless, because I don't really want to give him any credit. Not that it's credit, but acknowledgement, talking about, the pay cut that these ministers are taking, it's insincere and it's bollocks and it's just all posturing. And I'm like, dude, it's, Jacinda said very clearly, we are making a symbolic gesture. She actually said that it's not going to make any difference to the coffers. I think that's the words they used. And I'm like, these same metaphorically and literally thin-lipped commentators who put things out there are the same people who, if they hadn't taken a pay cut, would have been, oh, can you believe these ministers haven't taken a pay cut? And you know what I mean? And I was just like, stop, bro. It's like, what's the, someone who used to be involved in media, who I think is getting a little bit bored sitting back looking after his kids and nothing else. But there are some symbolic stuff. And it just made me think, actually, of what you're saying about CEOs taking a cut, standing up saying, look, we're making a sacrifice, but not acknowledging the freelancers. That actually seems a bit on the nose. That seems to be a bit of a, to coin a certain orange orangutan, a bit of fake news, a bit of a false narrative.
Well, it's a bit like the what they talk about, the your plate of bacon and eggs. The hens involved, but the pig's committed. In that scenario, we're the pig. We're God. And that takes me back to the point I was making earlier on about the comparison with 1984 and farming, and the unsustainability then, and what I perceive to be unsustainability now of the current large media organisations,
that are often top heavy as well. So they're big.
Well, that's right. Yeah,
and top
heavy. So
heavy.
You've got MediaWorks, you've got Stuff, you've got NZME. You did have Bauer. Am I forgetting one? I feel like I am.
Although Bauer seems to have pulled out using this as a reason to pull out rather than this being the final nail.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretext.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hugely profitable German entity that almost at that same time went and spent some tens of millions on acquisitions in Australia.
Yeah.
That was simply because over the sort of 10 years or so, I forget how many years they owned them, but there was a steady decline in a whole lot of those titles, and the future wasn't that promising. They perceived, it would appear. But my point is those large organisations are, as you said, top heavy with a lot of executives. My interest here is in saving the journalists, not the suits. And that's why I make the comparison with the reform of farming, because if you right size, to use the management jargon, these entities, you don't have that anymore. What you have is a newsroom, a spin-off, business desk, those kinds of outfits that are that other scenario I laid out, which is basically a server and some good journos. And what that implies, of course, is you wouldn't necessarily have newspapers and magazines. You wouldn't necessarily bother with TV. And that might sound a bit extreme. And as you mentioned earlier on, there is something rather more traditional about our media consumption here compared to other countries. There's a whole swathe of the population still has their channel button rusted onto Coronation Street. There is that dimension there. But the future is not that. There's no question about that. And for a great many of us, the way we consume our media is on these devices, not our computer screens. And that's where it's going. And that's certainly where you've got a snowball's chance in hell of a decent media organisation surviving in the face of the depredations of Google and Facebook taking all of the advertising, because you don't need nearly as much of that stuff if you're not paying for expensive executives and expensive premises and all of those overheads that make up the MediaWorks, the stuff, the NZME. For God's sake, there's another one. It'll come to me. But you know what I mean.
What about the ODT? You're talking to Dunedin here. You haven't mentioned the ODT. Allied Press.
They're the good guy. They're kind of the good guy. And this is a wrinkle in it. There's a regional dimension to this that is different. That if you are truly local, if you truly have something that nobody can read anywhere else that matters to you, you arguably still have a prospect of staying in business as a printed newspaper. And we've got a little local rag here in Devonport that flourishes for the same reason.
Is it local? So, is it the North Shore Times, or even is it more localised than that?
The Flagstaff, run by Rob Drent, who used to be at the Sunday Star Times 20 years ago. He's doing a great job of it. Well, by comparison, North Shore Times is a husk. It used to be a vital local newspaper, and then it became part of the Stuff Empire, and it's just it's thin and you don't bother with it.
I've loved that conversation about newspapers over the last couple of years, because I've sort of been of the same opinion as you. Because when you see newspapers, for example, in London shutting down, and they go, it's the death of the newspaper. What people don't realise is there's 11 daily newspapers in the UK that are nationwide, or whatever the ridiculous number is. You lose a few. But in New Zealand, you've always kind of had the Herald in Auckland, the Dom in Wellington, the Press in Christchurch, and the ODT in Dunedin, and then your regionals as well. And so I've always sort of been of the opinion, well, during this conversation about the death of the newspaper, is that probably in New Zealand you won't see papers shut down because that's a monopoly in that area. And you don't understand until you leave Auckland how Auckland-centric the Herald is, for example. So, but until you get out, you don't because it's called the New Zealand Herald, so of course it's the whole country, but it's not. It's. But I also wonder. I mean, I've had some experience with the ODT, and they're lovely people, but they're to be honest, probably not wise of me to say this, living in Dunedin and working in the media, they are a bit behind the times, and actually maybe what those entities, all of them, the Press and the Dom and the Herald as well, although the Herald's probably doing it more than most, is actually go, okay, how are my readers or my listeners or my viewers, because I have them, because I am local, how are they then going to consume my content for the next 10 years? And like you say, as I've been sitting here, my phone's on underneath here, and I've got an update from the Herald, and I've got an update from the Staff, and I've got an update from CNN, just while we've been sitting here about what's going on. Chinese doctor who discovered virus in Wuhan recounts first days of coronavirus outbreak on the Herald, and schools information on stuff. So I don't. Oh no, I do still go to stuff.co.nz, but I don't often go to the Herald. But I do see stories at my phone. I don't read the ODT, or if there's ever a big story in the ODT or a big Dunedin story, I will. Well, actually, when I say I don't read the ODT, I don't go to the ODT website and I don't read the hard paper. But if there's a big story, it's always shared on another platform like Facebook, and then that will draw me back to their website. But I'm not a regular.
That's right.
Yeah. So whilst
Twitter for me, everything begins on Twitter. No, mostly it begins on Twitter. I will open up New York Times and Washington Post and the New Yorker.
Yeah.
And I'll do, but in many instances that'll be because I'm driven there by their email alert.
Well, the other thing that I think we need to do, and I talked to Mike McRoberts a couple of days ago about this, is there is two things that need to happen. The first is that the consumer needs to, sounds a little bit Orwellian, it's a wrong thing to use in this current climate, but needs to be re-educated as to how to consume, but also the supplier needs to understand where that price point is. So the New York Times is a really good example, and I've already said this before on the podcast, that on Super Tuesday I was doing a podcast with Professor Robert Patman, and on that day it had a special which was $26 for the year for the New York Times. Beautiful. And I was like, I'll take that, because it would.
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. And we've used the example before that 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, Louis C.K. was tired of his stand-up routines and DVDs being pirated, so he made one himself. He put it on his website for $5. Digital download, and everyone bought it because it was only $5. So it's both finding, like, I understand that the online cost for the Herald is about $20 a month. That's not a small amount of money for most people, and I think that price point is too steep. I'm not saying it's not worth $20, but what the suppliers have to understand is, what are you worth? It's like selling a house. What's a house worth? What someone will pay for it. I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm not saying a house ain't worth 1.3 million, but if the market is only going to pay 900K for it, then they're only going to pay 900K for it.
That's right.
So I think there's two bits of education that need to happen. One is where the consumers go, and two is how the supplier meets them as well.
Well, there's also a dimension in here that we haven't talked about, and that is what role the state might play in this, because there is a kind of a suggestion rolling around that I suspect has some substance to it, that one of the options Cabinet's been considering, outside of whatever they do to immediately make things easier for those large media organisations, is some sort of contestable fund like NZ On Air for journalism that might be in your tens of millions, say. And so something like Newsroom could apply for that, or a startup could be applying for that. And you could actually have a great many more journos doing that kind of thing, because that money will get you a lot more bang for your buck when it's just that model of a server and some writers, and not the rest of the crap.
Totally.
And I'm pretty keen to see that, actually.
Oh, I mean, to be honest with you, I've had some chats with New Zealand On Air about funding and that sort of thing. And the example I give, and look, let me just say, I've used this example 3 or 4 times. I'm not talking them down. I love Spin-Off. I love what they do. They are genius at what they do. They should just stay away from television, in my opinion. Because I know. You can't be a
play to your strength.
You can't be a company that talks about the death of television for 4 or 5 years and then go, oh, we got given $750,000. Let's make a television show. You're right. Play to your strength. But that's a really good example. $750,000 for, I think it was 26 episodes that ended up with not many viewers by the end of it. And I'm like, $750,000 to independent broadcasters, be they, I mean, I don't know if they'd ever get to a level of funding bloggers. but be they bloggers or podcasters or local news sources or whatever. I mean, what any one individual or one or two people running a company could do with $100,000 would be exponential, compared to $750,000 to something that, I don't. There's no qualms, because if it had been, as successful as say a 7 days, then great, well money spent. But it wasn't, and so now it's time to shift and change the model. I tell you what I think, and credit where credit's due. Mike McRoberts put this idea into my head, talking to him the other day, is it just says that TVNZ should go full on BBC, no commercials, fully funded. That's where the money should go, and then that leaves all the advertisers for TV3 and Prime. I mean, I reckon that's what should happen. I'm now convinced of. I already thought, there was a lot of commercial complaints about the idea of a BBC style, meaning they'll take our ratings, but actually the flip side of that is they'll leave us their advertisers, and I actually think that's a way that public money could be spent, to actually save and secure the fourth estate, make sure good journalism's out there, but also say now, the warehouse can now spend all its money across 2 television stations, not 4, or whatever they're going to do.
I do have this feeling that television is the musical theatre of media. It takes a vast amount. There's a whole lot of effort goes into it. The costumes, the songs, the cast of thousands. But at the end, I'd rather just see a play, and it's a lot easier to put it on with a couple of people in a set. And especially when it comes to drilling down into a story, it's unless you've got the kind of longer form TV current affairs shows that we used to have, that are just a fraction now, you don't really have much of a prayer of doing that. Coupled with that, and I suppose I should say, well, obviously it's not for me because I haven't watched it in the longest time, but the 6 o'clock news on any channel is delivered to you in slow, ponderous tones like you're a dim 5-year-old. Well, I'm not here for that, bro. I don't need it. I don't want it. And I think it's dopey.
Well, they used to have that, and it was a ZB promo. I think it was like, read about it tomorrow, watch it tonight, hear it here now. News Talk ZB. Talking about the immediacy of radio, and they're right. I have been watching TVNZ News the last few weeks primarily because of this, but I haven't watched it in years, and so my alarm actually goes off at 5 to 1 to see the 1 o'clock update. So I'm primarily using. I mean, I could just jump online and do it on Stuff or Herald or whatever as well, but I've set my alarm and I have been watching a bit on that, but for one reason and one reason alone. And as I say, my alert comes up on my phone, and I could just push my phone and watch it online at the same time. But just, it's quite nice to put it on the 65-inch. If you're stuck at home with the fire on, then you just watch it there. It's feels all right. You can do that. The other thing is content, and I had an awakening 3 years ago when Periscope came out. The Twitter product Periscope, which is basically, for people who don't know it, an in-your-phone 4K video live streaming to the internet, right? And I thought, holy shit, if I can figure out how to manipulate the audio in this, then what I've got is a 4K camera that I can broadcast. Yeah, exactly. Television station, actually. Yeah. And that actually started me down the path to where we are today doing this thing. And you've got a whole bunch of people now who are providing content. And I don't want to make it sound like, look at us. It's not that. It's just people in general. I had an email. I shouldn't mention names of companies. I had an email with the CEO of one of the big media companies in New Zealand the other day, a provider of video content. And I said to him, because I'd already had a chat with a couple other podcasters, there are 3 or 4 of us out there that are putting out, HD video content, interesting conversations and stuff. We'll give it to you during this lockdown. Why don't you start a pop-up podcast station? We'll give you the content. Just use it. Just give people at home some more stuff to use. And of course, it's like, we've got some other contracts here, and we've got this and we've got that. And so it wasn't ever going to happen. But I just thought the other thing that television stations, I think, can be is more of the words just popped out of my head, but like a facilitator of content as opposed to a manufacturer of content. There is a lot of people out there. There are a lot of companies out there that are going like, this is our product. If you want to use it, or if you want to pay us a small fee for it, we can do this as a you can help us build profile. We can give you content, and we can meet somewhere in the middle. And and I think that's, you talk about going the long form television stuff. It's what we do every time. We sometimes talk on this thing for over 2 hours. Maybe it's not quite the journalistic integrity of delving deep into a particular topic, but I don't want to do that, so that's why it's not that. But it is, to coin a phrase that I've spoken to New Zealand Air about, telling New Zealanders stories. And that's what we do.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And before the cost cutting began at Radio New Zealand, there were newsrooms in just about every decent sized town up and down the country, and they had several people in them. In 1972, Radio Hauraki, which was a music station, they had a newsroom of 25 people.
Wow.
Imagine it. And it's if you're scattered right across the country, you are getting more dimensions of what's happening in New Zealand, getting the stories and telling them, than if everything is emanating from Auckland, which you can largely thank Stephen Joyce from, because he brought the mass production model to New Zealand for radio, and it makes it thinner. It makes it way thinner.
Yep.
The flip of that, what you were just saying about running for 2 hours, is duration in podcasts is confounding everything that we thought was happening in the media, that short attention spans and everything. Of last year, I think some of the most memorable journalism I've encountered was the Radio New Zealand Erebus, Radio New Zealand and Herald. I'm sorry, Radio New Zealand and Stuff podcast about Erebus.
Yeah,
and that was brilliant. And once you're captivated by it, you're suddenly there for hours, and happily for hours. And it's a sort of heartening reminder that journalism doesn't have to be news McNuggets.
Well, that's the other thing that came alongside the discovery of Periscope when it launched. Was I can well remember the day I was watching TVNZ, looking at TVNZ's website, and there was a video clip that was alongside a story, and I clicked on the video clip, and it was 7 seconds long. And I was like, what the fuck? It's like I can do more than 7 seconds. I actually kind of felt it was really disrespectful. It was like, it felt like they were saying to me, listen, all you norms out there, all you can handle is a 7-second clip. And you had to read the 4-minute article, but you could only handle. And I was like, no, this doesn't feel right. I just come off, 8 years at ZB and stuff, where I'd try and get 10 topics going, of which you talk about 1 or 2 of them for 5 hours.
Yep.
So it didn't feel right. And then you look offshore to what's happening in independent media, and you've got people who are doing that the sort of Young Turks or Dave Rubins or Packmans of this world, who are doing kind of 7 or 8 minute clips, but they're also doing it amongst a 2-hour show, and some of their clips are 7. And then John Oliver comes along, and he says, no, talk about one thing for 18 minutes with no breaks. That's the way to do it. And you kind of go, yeah, I think. In radio, it goes through cycles, and I was never a part of radio in the 80s, but they used to talk about being tight, bright, and out of sight. Be tight, bright, and out of sight. And then it came into the 90s, and you got this sort of Howard Stern type, I can't remember his name, but he was on the edge. And he was much more conversational. Flick open the mics and just start talking. Didn't have to. Ian Stables, that's who it was. And even Marcus Lush, when he used to be on ZM Breakfast, he'd basically turn the mic on and go, so, what are we talking about today? And it changed, and it changed the conversation. And when I saw the 7-second clip, I was like, this is not a good read on what society wants. Yeah, maybe society doesn't want a 19-minute clip about the story, but they certainly don't want a 7-second clip about the story. That was a sort of a part of the genesis of to start doing this, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because I just thought,
it's kind of got the vibe of doing overnight talk. I loved overnight talk. I mean, it kills you. Fuck, it's awful. for your health, and your daily life. But it's a real experience, because you drop into it. It's kind of like a long, slow run with people, and so you've got all the time in the world. If something happens, you've got enough time for somebody to tell you their story about. Well, this is another thing about it too. That whatever the topic was the least of it. That was, for the most part, I found everybody would have an opinion about it, and what I wanted to do was get their bullshit opinion out of the way and get to their story, because what they had to say about their own life was fascinating. It's a rare person who doesn't have something fascinating to share about their existence on this planet.
Yeah.
And you start getting that stuff, and when it's 3:30 in the morning, you've got all the time in the world to hear about where they went after they went to Cuba Petty, and out into the bloody desert of Australia. And tell me more, mate, because it's all good.
Yeah, and it's you're completely right, and it was one of the. I mean, I used to do mid-dawns as well, and people would say, "Oh, it must be hard, and I'm like, I loved it, and I left before I didn't love it anymore, and it was great, and it was also that now as you're saying, you've kind of vomited up the talking point that you heard John Key say. Now let's look a bit deeper into that and figure out why, and that's what I used to love to do as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
John Key or Helen Clark at the time. You could pick your poison. Speaking of your speechwriting, when did you get out of it from a governmental point of view? Who were you writing for when you kind of got out of it?
Well, it kind of tapered away. The whole arc of it is that I worked for Geoffrey Palmer when he was Minister of Justice, and then suddenly he became Prime Minister. So suddenly I'm in there as his speechwriter. And I liked it so much that when they chucked him out, I went off and set up a business writing speeches. And after a few years, Richard Griffin took over as Chief Press Secretary for Bolger, and he wanted somebody else to do the speeches, so he got me to do them from Auckland. But I was doing a big chunk of the speeches Bolger was doing, and I enjoyed that as much as I had with Palmer. And then there was a progression through the Labour leaders. I did a handful for Helen Clark, and that was by remote through forgetting, but not directly with her. Neither Bolger, for that matter.
Right.
And then you had the revolving door of Labour leaders, and they would get me in to help for one or two speeches, and then we'd kind of either they'd be gone, or we'd be saying, well, I don't know if this is really working. So I'd do a little bit for them. We get to Jacinda Ardern, and I did a couple for her, one just as she came in, and one a few months later. But she really doesn't need much help, to be honest. She's a very, very capable speaker and writer. She trained in it, and it shows. And so there's that part of it, but there's also that from the sort of early 2000s, I was becoming much more involved in blogging and commentating, and as you do that, you start to realize, well, there's a possible difficulty here of people saying that you're writing for somebody else and somebody else's interest. That was never so, and it never would be so. But
perception,
you've got your Caesar's wife thing of needing to be above suspicion, so for that reason, I kind of retreated from it. But also, the more you're writing your own opinion, the less you feel like writing somebody else's.
Right.
So I'm just less inclined, actually, and I don't really feel like doing it anymore, to be honest.
So you've been beloved by stuff and then rejected, like a lover. So what are you literally doing right now? What's the What's...
Don't know how we're going to get along without you, Dave. But starting now, we're going to try.
So what's your days filled up with at the moment?
Yeah, well, the nice thing is because partly, I suppose, because I made a point of putting my hand up so that people knew that it had happened.
Mm-hmm.
I had various people stepping in right away saying, would you like to come and do this? Would you like to come and do that? So I'm doing some writing for a law firm. I'm doing some for a share investment outfit. I'm doing some for an NGO. The only reason I'm not naming them is because that's for them to say once those things are in view.
Yeah.
But the plan I have in mind is that on my long neglected but soon to be resurrected, revived speeches.com site, I'm going to have a page that gathers together all of the material I'm doing. That'll be available there, and as well. I should have said I've been doing the odd piece for Newsroom, and we'll be doing some for RNZ online.
Nice.
And so all of that stuff will get gathered there,
mm-hmm.
and on top of that, the plan is to do a weekly free Sunday column to replace the one that you used to find in the Sunday Star Times. And
so on the website, so basically be your blog
on the website, yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing like a masterclass? It seems to be quite a high thing at the moment that you do a masterclass in speech writing. That'd be quite a good thing.
Yeah, I have done workshops along the way. Did them in America, did them in Malaysia, and had a great time. It was, in fact, the only reason I stopped was because it was more straightforward on the speeches.com site to just concentrate on the automatic speech writing part of it, because that was when Google AdWords came along, suddenly it became a real money spinner. And so it seemed kind of counterproductive to be putting my time into doing stuff in real life when I could just be expanding that part of it. But at the point of the GFC, and also Google changing the way Google AdWords worked, suddenly the profit went out of it. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's ended up kind of moribund, because it took me a long time to realize what was going wrong. And so there is a sort of latitude to be doing that again. But I think there's another dimension that I'm about to add to the speeches.com site, and that's to do with mortality. I've come to realize that there's a lot that you can do in the process of leaving this life,
right,
to gather together your memories, get them written, and prepare for how those will be shared when you've gone at the ceremony, and maybe assist with conceiving that ceremony and helping get those stories gathered so that it becomes the richest and most worthwhile it can be. You know, I've got an old Catholic friend who says, "I love a good funeral," and what she means by that is, you know, when everybody comes together and is able to share memories and pictures of that person, it's a really, really rewarding experience, because there's catharsis, but there's also recognition, there's also understanding of what life is. So those are all processes of speeches, eulogies really, that I want to enhance on the site and make available. And so that was in fact the project that I was preoccupied with when I suddenly had to go looking for other work. So those two things are happening at the same time, and I'm pretty damn busy at the moment, actually. But that's good. I'm relieved.
Yeah.
Because that is the great worry for these coming months and years, that there's not going to be enough work to go around.
Well, I think
now I'm good.
I think those of us and you're in the camp that are sort of working, operating, whatever the correct working implies getting paid for. So let's say delving into operating, working, whatever, in this area that is new or / new media. I've been approached by a dozen people or companies in this lockdown saying, "Can you help us do XYZ?" And I'm like, "Yep." And actually, one of them is someone who wants to do sort of again, I won't say which companies they are, but it sort of wants to do sort of a masterclass, wants to put their stuff online behind a paywall because they don't know how long this is going to last. They don't know if they're going to be able to go out and do
Right.
workshops
Yeah.
in the next 12 months and even beyond that. So this is the time to do it. So, yeah, it's interesting where the opportunities do actually come up. I'm intrigued with the whole funeral thing. My mum passed about 18 months ago. Irish Catholic lady. So you can imagine the funeral, and it was
A fine affair.
it was a fine affair, and it was one of those things. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and that was a part of my history. You know, my mum's parents were straight out of the Falls Road, and if you know Northern Ireland, that's the centre of the IRA troubles. The Falls Road. They literally, one of them grew up on the Falls Road. So that's the heritage we kind of grew up with, and it was the idea of you haven't quite used these words, but sort of giving people the tools to be able to deliver those eulogies well. I think that's amazing. I mean, I'm lucky enough to be, you know, possibly a bit of a show off and you know, fairly arrogant, so I feel quite comfortable standing up in front of people. And I started Mum's funeral, like I was the first to speak, and it nothing to do with me and to do with what we delivered, but you know, telling one or two anecdotes. Like one of the anecdotes I told, and my father is so hilarious because he was like, "Oh, I never knew that," and I'm telling an anecdote about him and my mother, because Mum shared with me once that the difference between her parents and my dad's parents was on their wedding day. They went. It was either the wedding day or the day after, whichever it was. You know, they went to Dad's parents' place, and it was all kind of English proper. You know, pinkies out, cups of tea, you know, cucumber finger sandwiches, and it was a lovely lovely event, lovely and polite. They went to Mum and Dad's. They went to Mum's mum and dad's, the Irish nutters living in Newmarket, and literally dancing on the table, and all the cousins pissed as anything.
Beautiful.
And you know, they decided they're the kind of people that wanted to have a bit of a more slippery dance floor, so they threw dishwashing detergent on it to make the dance floor slide a bit better and this kind of stuff. And I told that analogy. I told that story at the funeral, and my point was, you know, for Mum today, why don't you do some dancing on the tables? That's what we're doing today, sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, great.
And at the end of it, people clapped, and I was like, and I wasn't like, I'm not trying to say yay me. It was I did a good performance, but that was the vibe, and the vibe all the way through. You know, I've got nieces who are 17 now, last year of school. Really struggled to get, you know, they're kind of the representation of the grandkids sort of thing. Really struggled to get through it, but it was just it was that definition of a celebration of life rather than the commiseration of death. But it was great, you know. So I hear you saying that, and I'm not saying yay us, but I kind of felt like, you know, the Irish Catholic in me has got that, you know, tell a yarn sort of thing, and to give to be able to give that as a gift or as a skill to other people, be at weddings, it would be, funerals would be amazing. Well, weddings as well, I guess, but it would be amazing. It's a great idea.
Both.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's a great idea.
Here's the thing: no matter how well you think you knew somebody, there'll always be something, like you were saying about your dad, that you hear that you didn't know.
My dad said to me, "I've never heard that story before." I'm like, "Well, Mum told me," so it's his story, and I'd never heard it.
Yeah, and that's the marvelous thing, that this whole mosaic gets filled in with all of these stories, and it's a wonder. It's so good.
It's good fun too. A little bit of emotion come up me there. I wasn't quite expecting that, but you know, happens. It's a part of it.
It's a potent thing, man.
Yeah,
it is, because these are the strongest human feelings we're dealing with, and our connection with one another, and our memory. And as we recall somebody, the intensity of that thing wells up, and it absolutely can take you by surprise.
Yeah.
That's why you were talking about the girls in their last year at school. It's a thing I've often seen, that teenage girls really struggle. They get up to speak because they very much want to say something, but then they just absolutely choke and dissolve into tears. And one one small thing I recommend is that whatever they've written down, because it's almost always they're reading something out.
Yep.
Short sentences. Short sentences, so you're not caught in the middle of
so they can take a breath and
it
go,
doesn't catch your throat
and get that one sentence out. Yeah, no, they got through it though. My one of my sisters kind of was standing up beside them, and you had that delightfully shy teenage girl turning away from the mic, kind of going, I can't do it. And one of my sisters was like, no, you can do this. Come on, keep going. And they got through it. It was good. It was great.
Yeah. But it's a wonderful thing, and when people are able to look back as you are now and recall it with fondness and gladness, it's an enduring joy, because it matters a lot that at the time they went, you were able to say something that meant something, and it's really worthwhile. And that's why, as you can see, I'm really preoccupied with making this thing happen. And there's a further dimension, and that is that last year, there were at the Going West Writers Festival, I chaired a panel with 3 writers who'd written about aspects of death, and it was in reading the excellent stuff they'd done, I had kind of epiphany, really, because for 30 years or more, I had a heart attack on my 27th birthday, and that's the kind of thing that makes you kind of turn your back on your vulnerability and your mortality. And so I've lived in denial and to some extent. I mean, at the same time as talking about it and sharing about it, I've actually kind of turned my back on the notion of not making it. And of course, nobody gets out alive. But in doing that, and I don't know, maybe along the way, kind of apprehending other dimensions to it, I've sort of come around to being much more at ease with it, and recognizing that, well, crucially for me, it's the notion that we're all part of something larger. That we're all just it's a lava lamp of atoms that just circulate around, and when we go, those atoms move around. But that it's just it's a set collection of atoms that just keep moving, and the notion that those stay even if you're gone is kind of heartening. We're all still there, and somehow I'm more at ease with it. Maybe it's also that I've lived longer now, so I feel that I won't necessarily be missing so much. But just before the lockdown, I actually had an MRI because I had an elevated PSA, and that might have spelled trouble. And thankfully, got the MRI with 3 days to go, and then got the results from the specialist once we were in lockdown, that I'm all okay.
Is PSA related is that related to the prostate?
Yeah,
right.
Prostate, sorry, yeah. And so my point being that going through that process, I was strangely at ease with it.
Right.
Recognizing that I might be getting news that I need cancer treatment, and it might not be good news, and boy, that's going to be fun trying to navigate that in the middle of a lockdown. But if it spelled the worst, somehow I wasn't that vexed about it.
No, that's
so
interesting.
I don't know. But I'm rambling a bit now, but my crucial point being, it's one of the most profound things we have to deal with, and finding words to express what we're feeling is a crucial part of it, and that turns out to be something I'm useful at, so something I can do.
Yeah, it's the thinking about talking about death. I don't know if it's a particularly good thing overall to talk about right now, but one of the things that makes me, I don't know if saddest is the right thing, but I think one of the saddest things from this current thing is I think about elderly people in hospital without their families around them right now.
Oh God!
And I just can't fathom. I mean, like I'm not where you are with death. I'm still kind of a little bit freaked out by the whole thing. But I don't without I don't want to get emotional necessarily on this. But one of the times I appreciate most of all about my mum passing was the time we spent with her at the end in the hospital. She had motor neuron disease, so that was the finishing of it. I turned up. So I'm in Dunedin, obviously, and I got a call on probably the Monday. I can't. It was all a blur. One of my sisters saying, "Okay, get up here today," and I'm like, "Okay, right, I'll organise and I'll get on my way and I'll get up there." I ended up not getting up there till Tuesday, and I remember thinking, Mum's going to wait for me. You know, it's. I didn't have that urgency like she's going to go. She's going to wait for me. And I don't know if you can see, but I'll take this. I haven't had a haircut in 2 months because of this frickin' lockdown. So I'm a little bit, I'm going a bit crazy up on top sort of thing. And I hadn't had a haircut for her, and I'd got off the plane, and actually, as you can see with this revolting thing as well, it's normally a bit more tapered and stuff, but the barbers are all shut. And I walked into the hospital, and it was probably Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, and she laughed. And what did she call me? She called me some kind of derogatory name about the hairy something or other from something or other, and some Irish, sort of thing. Yeah. And then we got to spend kind of 3 days. She fucking held on for 3 days. She refused to die in the end. She said that one of the ironies of this thing was she didn't have any health issues. She wasn't on rat poison, so she had a really strong heart. And what I mean at the end, but it wouldn't give up. It's like there was probably 3 times I was like, oh, she'll probably go. And she just wouldn't. She refused to. So in the end, we were all sitting around kind of with her in the hospital room, playing Irish music and having her sing along with all this kind of stuff. But one of my favourite moments, one of the ones I hold on to most dearly was, I'm not saying I understand what it is to be Māori. I'm not any. I mean, you can see me. I'm sort of so Celtic. I'm almost pale blue. But there was something really strong in me that wouldn't leave the body. I couldn't leave the body. I wouldn't leave it alone. I got to spend an hour and a half after she had passed in the room with her by myself, just sitting. I actually had a nap in the chair because I was exhausted. And thinking about people dying in hospital today from this fucking horrific thing. I heard a story yesterday about one of the elderly people who passed away, who got to hold someone's hand, but it was glove to glove. And I understand why, but just something about that tears my heart out, thinking about what I experienced with my mum 18 months ago. I mean, as I said, I don't want to die. I'm not in that place where I've come to terms with the idea of mortality, but the idea of that, I had a person who I used to know very well, a friend, a contact, a colleague, not a colleague, but someone I know, who passed away like 4 days before the lockdown. And so his funeral got reduced from, probably 250 people to 10. And but at least he was with his family. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't want to speak to them, but that idea of sitting in hospital surrounded by coats and gloves and masks, and not having your family, that just tears.
It's the saddest thing.
Oh, I just can't get past that. So, it's poor people.
Yeah. Here's one thing. It's not a full consolation, but it is some consolation. That what I've been talking about, the telling of stories, the coming together, the making it meaningful. That's something you can do at any time, and that's something that can be done when we leave lockdown.
Yeah, true.
Time permits. To do it well, it's something.
Yeah,
it's not everything, but it would be a consolation, I guess.
That was a fairly cheery note to come to this point in the podcast on, wasn't it?
Sorry about that.
people dying in their hospital rooms by themselves. Right? How's your Saturday?
Yeah.
Anyway, so you've got lots of work on. You say you're really busy. If people want to see you and read your stuff and that, how long before your blogs and your speeches and stuff's up and running? When's that?
About a week. About a week, I think, Pat. Only because I've the law firm I mentioned, I've got a shitload to do for them, and I'll be working on that all weekend. But once I've got that done, then I can turn to the business of get it. Actually, what I'm going to do with speeches.com, because it still needs stuff fixed since I moved it onto a different platform, is I'll shut most of it down, but I'll have that page running. And so we're just talking about setting up a page. So that obviously that doesn't take much time. So I just need to get an hour for that.
What about it? You must have a couple of books in you, surely. You got a couple of books in you about your work in the political world.
Yeah, there's a project I'm working on of a satirical nature, but I can't say too much about it. The idea is that I'll be putting that. It is very relevant to the immediate thing confronting us.
Yep.
And my plan is just to stick that on Amazon and
see how it goes.
So, yeah. because it needs to be out now,
Right.
and so that's hey, let's hope in the next month or so. Longer term, I have been talking with the publishers I've worked with in the past about doing something. They really liked what I did about last year in the Sunday magazine about giving up drinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 14 months sober now.
Well done.
And feeling great. And they wondered if there might be a book in that, and I think there might be. So I'm just sort of figuring out what to do about that.
Hey, well, I got one other question for you, though, and we'll shoot off in a second. This is a TARDIS when you come and talk to me. It's an hour and 10 already. It feels like it's been about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, you have been in the halls of power. You've sat in the rooms and that kind of stuff as well. So you've seen it a lot, and you've commentated a lot for the last 20, 30 years. How do you think Jacinda's, and I guess in turn, the Labor government is handling this current climate? I'm interested as well. Like, I hear Simon Bridges saying he wants to get out of this and get to level 2. And I just kind of go, what planet are you on? But I also want to check myself before I wreck myself to make sure that, you know, that because I'm feeling quite conservative about this. You know, I'm the person that will go, I'd be happy to stay in this level 4 for an extra week. But I see commentators, especially ones in America, and actually a right-wing commentator, no, it wasn't actually, it was a senator in America, said something that I watched this morning while I was getting ready to chat with you, and they said, you know, if our economy crashes, then the world's economy crashes. And whilst I don't think that's a reason to, you know, open everything up, I kind of go, well, that's probably a valid point as well. And I just wanted to get a vibe from you, what you thought about how we were going at the moment. And yeah, there is some criticism starting to come out now, like Peter Dunn yesterday. I loved it. I've put it on my Facebook page people want to see it, talking to Mike Hoskins, and Mike Hoskins goes, oh, there's this brilliant piece being written, and it's fabulous, and it's wonderful, and it's brilliant. And then he tries to have a fucking interview with the guy and tries to push back with some answer that, you know, he's already basically said this is perfect. And he goes, but doesn't Simon Bridges, you know, cover that off? Well, it's not what he means. But there are people who are starting to push back now, and I feel that they've got the luxury of hindsight. They're pushing back now after it's been successful. I never heard Peter Dunn on day 1 saying this is too far. But on day 21, he has the luxury of going, well, New Zealand's okay, so I can share my views now, which is not where I'm at. But I'll stop talking and ask you, what do you think? How do you think it's been and where we're going from here, and how this government has handled it?
Pretty bloody effectively, actually. You know, I think the wider context to begin with is there's no way for this to come out with no harm. You know, whichever choice you made, something was going to go wrong. And of the less than perfect options, I think they've chosen the one that's going to hurt us in the long run relatively least, which is not to say not still a shitload. Yeah. But they're taking it in a measured and intelligent way. I think the way in which they conditioned us pretty quickly for moving to lockdown was really impressive communications, and I think at least initially the will to make it succeed has been really comprehensive, all but universal, and that's a pretty bloody good accomplishment as well. You do get people sooner or later starting to divide along partisan lines, and you're seeing it. But there's a kind of a useful test for this by asking people who don't have a dog in the fight what they think of it, and that therefore is people in other parts of the world looking at us and saying they're doing it really bloody well. And I think that's the truth of it. You've got people who are tuning in from other countries for the 1 o'clock press conference because they like it so much. Wow. You know, they wish that they could see that kind of reassuring leadership in their own country. Well, that kind of tells you something. I'm not saying that they got this perfectly right. Although there are people who say, geez, they wish they'd closed the borders sooner. But, you know, that's the hindsight you're talking about. I'm not sure how well that would have gone at the time. One argument I heard from a farmer was he thought that it was essentially that if they had tried that, the resistance from tourism and Air New Zealand would have been so comprehensive that they couldn't do it. Or, in fact, I think he was implying that that's what happened, that they impeded it for some time and that might have happened sooner. I'm not sure about that. But certainly if it had happened sooner, we might have got to eradication faster.
Yeah.
But, there are two things we're looking for now, and that is a effective antibody test and a vaccine. And until those things happen, we're in a world of pain. And globally, I mean. And the comforting thing for us here is that we've got something the world needs, food, and we're sending it out there, and that's bringing the money back in. We've got large parts of the economy that can still function, but you have that tourism sector that we relied on that's fully a fifth of our economy, and that's essentially dead for now. And attendant to that are all the multiplier effects of all of the restaurants and all of the transport arrangements and everything that big job creators that mean a lot of people don't have work, and we've got to figure out ways for people displaced by that to do something, and that's the big challenge. And I think so far they've done the right thing. We'll see in the next couple of weeks how much more they've been able to find and what that will do for us. But so far, so pretty good. Is how I summarize it.
It sounds like sort of what you're saying is, if you could have a perfectly positive result, they've got enough of those positives right, but it's not perfect. And if you could have the worst case scenario happen, they've got the fewest number of those worst case scenarios happen. So sort of a perfect storm. I guess that I don't want to say perfect storm, because obviously things that could be better, but I also, we were talking before about, and this is the second time I've had this conversation in 3 days, so for people who are listening again, I apologise, but the idea about the media, there's two parts to the media conversation. One is the suppliers need to find that price point to attract the audience, and the audience needs to understand and learn where the media is coming from. Now, I think the same, in my opinion. I feel like drawing up like a false TVNZ advert and putting it out as a meme is that the tourist industry and New Zealand can do that at the moment as well. Well, not at the moment, but let's say when we get to level 2, and I've said this a few times, Air New Zealand needs to run a campaign that's, can't do France, do Whakatane. Can't do Queensland, do Queenstown. And they need to find a price point that then causes New Zealand to have the loyalty to support them back. And Airbnb owners need to put their, Queenstown apartments down from $350 a night to $75 a night. You know what I mean? So it's like working that all out together and driving money into our own economy to it won't be the same as Japanese money or American money or English pounds, but it will be something like, for me, for example, I've taken a hit financially, but I'm able at the moment with business just to kind of stay where I was at least. So I'm incredibly grateful for that, because a lot of people have gone backwards or lost jobs. If we can figure out a way that we can keep that tourist economy sort of at an even keel as we get through this by supporting it ourselves, then it's still there to open up when this is over, rather than, Bauer Media, it being gone completely. That's what I read.
Right. You're absolutely right. And because we have a decent chunk of the economy still functioning, that means that economy can then be taking that money and spending it in that tourism. We've got so many great things you can do here. You can go into any goddamn hut, any goddamn trail, any goddamn beach. It's just so good.
Yep, and go to your local butchers once they're back open again. And I'm not saying avoid the supermarkets, but we've got a fantastic deli butcher here in Northeast Valley in Dunedin. I'll go there and get my meat. Go and have. Fine, get your 6-pack from your supermarket, but also go and have a beer on a Thursday night at your local bar. Just little things along the way to put back in when we can. And that's what I'm kind of on that. My philosophy at the moment is kind of just, we try and break even. If the country can break, and I know that I'm sounding a bit arrogant because some people have gone backwards, and I'm not diminishing that. So for example, if you're a landlord at the moment and you have a business renting from you, and your mortgage is $1,000 a week, but you're charging them $2,000 a week, charge them $1,000 a week. Break even. Charge them $1,000 a week. You'll get through. They'll get through. We'll come out the other end to put it back up. If you can If you can afford to go out and have a couple of beers on Friday night, think about going and have a couple of beers at your local cafe or bar rather than buying, a dozen beers. Yeah, you're drinking less, but you're helping them and you're breaking even. So it's this break-even mentality that if we all can try as much as we can to get there, what that means is we can still be here. And I don't mean physically, but that bar can still be there, or that butcher's can still be there, or Air New Zealand can still be there when we're ready to expand again. And, I don't think it will ever go back to the way it was, but that idea, that business can still be there because the landlord has enabled them to break even as opposed to make profit. That sort of thing.
Yeah. If you're earning money, circulate it.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah. Let's be a proper socialist country.
Yeah.
And interesting to see, speaking of socialist countries, not that they're socialist, but it's interesting to see the last poll I read, or was it the poll of polls? I saw a poll of polls that had Labour at 50%, and I am going to put out there, I wonder if we're ever going to see a majority government at MMP, this might be the one. Because
possibly, but it's really, really hard.
And it's really early.
It was actually hard even under first past the post to get past 50%.
Yep.
In the vote share. I never say never, but I think because you've got a Green Party as well, there's always going to be a constituency there, and they're valuable. They're really good. So,
yeah. Well, the vibe I get off my Facebook page, which is not necessarily scientific literature, but because of working in the media and working in radio before, I don't have a microcosm or a bubble on my page of just people who have the same position as me. I have quite a wide breadth. The bubble I get is when I put up questions like, I'd be happy to stay in lockdown for an extra week to nail this thing. 90% of the people responding are, I'm with you. So I think that those dissenting is the correct word. Discerning would be the opposite. Those dissenting voices at the moment who are saying, Labour's done wrong, they did poorly. What did I say the other day? They're Barry Soper. They're aware they went too hard and they're trying to catch up for it now. It's like I think that they're not going to help any political party come election time. Assuming, I mean, it is a long time to election. There's a week is a long time in politics. And someone talked about March felt like a year, like the year of March, seeing so much went on. But I think that the dissenting voices at the moment, it's like, New Zealand hasn't been through enough yet for us to get sick of it. If we were still in lockdown in 2 months from now, right. I'm sure there'd be many more dissenting voices, but I think at the moment, the vibe I'm getting from the nation is we did the right thing, and dissenting voices, therefore, are not helping their political position. Maybe they will in 2 months if it's harder, but at the moment, they're not.
It's also much easier to say that while things are not moving at all. Once they are, it becomes a lot harder to make the argument because what are you looking for? You now have it, and you can Monday morning quarterback it. But I think people will probably be more preoccupied with making sure that things are working for them.
Yeah,
and they'll keep watching the numbers and the charts, and they'll be watching the international numbers, and that'll be a continuing reminder that we didn't do this for laughs.
Yeah.
And like I said, right, the very first point, there was no perfect option here.
Yeah.
Whatever you did, there was going to be harm.
Yeah.
And I think there's no question that going for eradication because it's possible here was the best start.
And can I just say that, and if people aren't aware of this is my opinion on why they're doing it, and maybe it's obvious to many, but I think to some it's not. The reason it appears that the government is doing, anyone can get tested at the supermarket at the moment, is they're doing sample sizes of the community. They're actually doing research as to, think about this. We're supposed to come out of lockdown next week. Over the last 3 or 4 days, they've been in Queenstown supermarkets, Christchurch supermarkets, Waikato supermarkets, giving out free tests, not that they cost, but anyone can give it a go. What they're doing is they're testing the community. They want to see, is this thing in the community without our knowledge? And when I heard them do that, I thought that's genius, because I heard, it was at yesterday's press conference, they said of the 300 Queenstown tests, 175 had come back and they were all negative. And I went, if all of those supermarket tests come back negative, I'm like, this eradication thing is a possibility. And I'm dumbfounded by that. The idea that it could be possibly eradicated and then we become a little literal and figurative island to ourselves would be amazing. Would be
colossal.
Oh my
really,
goodness.
Really, really good.
Yeah, would be amazing. So yeah,
I'm not sure if I can take part. I'm just going to go into profile for you.
Oh.
I just don't think there's a test kit big enough for this. This long as it is, I think I might defeat it.
Hey, David Slack, I'm aware that, as you've said, you're busy this weekend with stuff for lawyers, so I think we're going to just sign off and leave it there. It has been a lovely conversation. As I said to you at the start, for people who don't know, they weren't here, is I never have any idea what we're going to talk about when we start these things. They really are the department of conversation. You know, it's really open up the mic and start chatting. And I've very, very, very much enjoyed our conversation, even though you did make me cry halfway through. I don't know. I think that's a first for me.
Make him laugh, make him cry. That's the massive maxim, isn't it? It's good.
And look, this is a new world for everything, including what we do here, and how much easier it is with, the only two, what did we say before? The only two stocks in the world doing well at the moment are Netflix and Zoom. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, right. That's right.
But with this new world that we're going on, let's not leave it another 3 or 4 or 5 years before we chat again, because we don't have to.
Yeah. No, it's always great chatting with you, man. And let's make it soon.
So speeches.com, people keep an eye out there for the next couple of weeks to keep an eye out for what's going on there.
Yeah. I'll try and make it within a week.
And other than that, David Slack, you're a beautiful man, and thanks for giving us some time this morning.
It's been great. Cheers, Pat.